This video is sponsored by Warlord Games. Now, whether you're new to World War II wargaming or historicals in general, or you're just looking for some speedy painting hacks, this is the video for you. I'm Peachy, and this is Peachy Tips. So the plan is to show you 3 ways of approaching painting, whether that's the stuff on the starter set or just your models in general. Now, the first one is going to be super quick and simple, and it's like literally a handful of colours. So if you just want to get stuff on the tabletop, it's perfect for that. Then the second option is to add some extra colours to that, some extra embellishments using some things called speed paints, if you're not familiar with those. And the last one is to go more into like a little bit of highlighting and dry brushing, but not a lot. It's mostly camouflaging it with like quick hacks and special effects. So they're the 3 ways I'm going to show you how to paint, and each one builds on the previous stage as well. So if you get up to the first stage, you can then add these extra colours on the second stage, and then the third one you can add on top of that. I'll also cover the scenery. Again, that's going to be super quick and simple because some of us just don't have the time to paint the scenery. So I'm going to show you some quick ways on how to do that as well. Now, I'll be covering both the Americans and the Germans with those methods as well. And I'll be using Army Painter Fanatic paints and their Speed Paint 2.0. So if you're not familiar with those, they're really good paints. I really rate them. I use them for most of my videos. Many reasons. They're just good quality. They've got good coverage. They have a really nice grading system as well. So it starts off on like the darker tone all the way up to like the really light tone. So there's usually 6 colours in that swatch. And they have plenty of different hues as well. So you have like dark greens and saturated reds and cool reds and everything in between it. Lots of fleshy colours, lots of reds, lots of greens, all the colours you can think of. They all come in sets of 6 and they all move from dark to light. It's really easy to pick highlights and shades from these. It's great. And of course, like I said, the speed paints, if you're not familiar with those, very different to normal sort of paints. They're a bit more thinner, really good for running into the recesses, also giving a nice coverage over the model. And also as they dry, they pull away a little bit and gives you a bit of a highlight as well. Perfect for anyone that's like, you know, short on time or quite new to this. Now, in regards to undercoating and priming, in these guides, I'm going to be doing them by hand because I'm not going to assume you might have a spray paint. So I'm going to go with the lowest common denominator and assume you don't have one. However, if you do have them and you have the relevant colours, perfect. For my Americans, I've used a nice military green. This one from Colourforge, really like that. And I've got a grey one. You can get it from anywhere. It's Mechanica Standard Grey from Citadel, but you can just use any grey. You can use Standard Grey from Colourforge. So they're the 2 sprays I do use for the majority of the troops when I'm painting them up. But for the paint guys, I'm going to do it by hand to show you that process as well. It's also really handy if you're doing the scenery, you can use these 2 spray paints as well to really quickly paint up your scenery, which we'll come to later. But yeah, from a priming point of view, sprays are really quick and efficient. But if you don't have them, well, when I do the first guide, you'll see what I do. Speaking of which, so my first step for priming is going to get some army green. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm just going to apply it to the palette, thin it down with a little bit of water. So a couple of drops of paint and about a paintbrush of water, mix it together, and then that's ready to coat over the model. Now, because I've slightly thinned it down, that's fine. It means it will just go in those recesses a bit quicker. I might have to do a second coat, which is totally normal. I don't want it too thick and goopy because that's the downside. If you make it too thick and goopy, it gets really streaky and obscures all your detail. So a couple of thin coats is better than one big thick coat. So where it might need a second coat, I'm just going to apply that now. And take your time. So normally I don't do mixing in like basic paint guides, but in this particular case, because the gunmetal colour isn't dark enough for my liking, all I'm going to do is get a little bit of black, a little bit of silver, mix them together until I'm happy with the colour. There's no right or wrong way of doing this. You don't even have to do this. And then once you're happy with the tone, all you need to do is just give your brush a little spin, get it to a nice point, and then start picking out the gun. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. You could paint the guns brown, but I'm just going to go with a nice dark metal. Then I'm going to just move on to black on its own, and I'm just going to use that to pick out the boots. Traditionally, Americans do have dark brown boots, but I think black, certainly from an artistic license point of view, looks a little bit better. Now, I purposely just splodged there because I want to show you how easy it is to fix. So by doing that army green to start off with as the prime, I'm just going to tidy back up with that where I made any splodges. And you can do this all throughout the painting process. Next up is just to pick out the skin. This is going to be very bare bones paint guide for this particular section. So just a bit of green, bit of silver, bit of black, and then pick out the face. Again, if you do splodge, because that's inevitable, you can just tidy back up. But in some places you might need to do a second coat, and especially in those hard to reach areas, again, some tidy ups may be needed. Like I said, it's all good, it's all normal. Now you could start with a grey undercoat, but I'm not assuming you do have that, so we're just going to go with something called deep grey, very much like we did with the green on the American. Just thin it down a little bit and then just do a couple of thin coats all over the model. So that's what I'm doing here, just getting that nice deep grey, slightly thinned down and going around. This is a messy old brush as well. This is my sort of like heavily base coating brush, so do find an old brush if you do want to be a bit rough. And again, very much like the American, just picking out the gun with a darker gunmetal. You can get a stock picked out, and then of course, just in the same vein as the American as well, pick out the boots black. And again, like we did on the previous one, if you do make any mistakes, you can tidy back up with that grey. And it's just a matter of picking out the face. In some places, you might need to do a second coat. Again, totally normal, totally fine. Just have fun. Again, it's a really, really simple paint guide. And if you're not happy with having a grey base, then just find some kind of colour that, like a brown or a sandy colour. I've got something called Tundra Taupe here, which we'll use further on in the paint guide. Really nice way of just getting them based. And there we are, a really simple, straightforward paint guide that means you can get stuff on the tabletop pretty quick. So there we are, just a handful of colours, and they look great. Perfect for the tabletop when you're just getting started. If your skill set is like quite low and you just want to build up on those skills, perfect for getting things on the tabletop and playing games with. So what I'm going to do now is move on to applying some other colours. I'm going to use some speed paints in this section as well. So if you're not familiar with speed paints, they're kind of thin paints, but what they do is they kind of tone the area with colour. They kind of sink in the recesses, so it gives you a bit of a shade. And as they dry, they pull away from the edges, which gives you a bit of a highlight. It's great. They're also really good for changing the tone of a colour as well. So you'll see this on the GI trousers. But yes, we're going to do this on both the Germans again and the Americans. So let's crack on. Add in some speed paints. So we're going to kick proceedings off by using that Tundra Taupe like we use on the base. I'm going to use this for all the things like the putties, the webbing, the satchel, any kind of straps. So I'm just going to whip my way around, pick those out. In some places I might want to do a second coat. So this is going to add a little bit more colour to our US Ranger or infantryman, depending on how you want to use them. Again, work your way around. If you're making any mistakes, again, tidy back up if you need to. And of course, there's a couple of straps to pick out, whether that's for the gun or the satchel. So just take your time on those as well, if you want to do that. Now we're going to use our first speed paint. So this is hardened leather. So you could use it straight from the pot, but I like to thin it down. You do get something called speed paint medium, which is basically the speed paint without any pigment in it. So it's really good for watering them down, but I'm only using a little bit here and water is fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this over the trousers. It's going to do two things. It's going to settle in the recesses, which I want. So I want to get a bit of shade in there. But what I really like is it gives the actual trousers more of a khaki drab kind of feel. So just from that green undercoat that we've got, by using a slightly different browny colour over the top of it, it kind of makes it more of a drab sort of khaki tone, which is great. And then I'm going to get burnt moss. I'm going to apply this to the helmet. I've done this with all my helmets, and of course you've got that netting on there. Even the ones that don't have netting, it works really well. And then for the skin, I'm going to use something called Warrior Skin. So I've used 3 different speed paints here for 3 different sections. Again, you have to be a bit neat in places because you're obviously picking out different colours here and there. But again, you can always tidy back up with those colours like I'm doing here. All part of the process. It does happen. We're only human. And then for the rifle wood detail, if you like, I'm just going to pick this out with leather brown. It's the closest kind of colour that looks right. And you can always find one that works for you. I'm using Army Painter. I like this one, so I'm using this one. And then for extra definition in those recesses, I'm going to apply all over with some strong tone. Now you might be thinking, but you've just done like some shading with speed paints. Well, what this is going to do is it's going to add a little bit more definition onto that green, but it's also going to help tie all those other colours together as well with that same shade all over. And then if I need to, I can just go around and just like, if anything's pooling too much, just add a little bit more here and there. Then we're going to move on to the German. Now, for the trousers, I wanted a field grey. We don't have a field grey in the Army Painter range at the moment. So what I want to do is find some colour that's close to it. So I've got something called Medieval Forest. It's a bit pale, but if you're not bothered, you can use that. There's no mixing required. It looks okay. Alternatively, you've got deep grey. You've got some of this Medieval Forest. Mix them together until you're happy with the tone. And you've got yourself a nice sort of field grey kind of tone. Now, I would do this all in one go, in one sitting. Like if you've got like 5 or 6 guys in a sitting, try and get a similar mix. That's the downside to mixing. Sometimes you might get different variations. But then clothing, dyes, helmet paint, stuff like that did vary across the war anyway. So between squads, it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going back over now what I did with that medieval green and turning that into field grey. Now I'm going to pick out any straps with black. So all the bits of webbing on this guy, all the Germans tend to have like black details on their leather. So the belts, the pouches, the straps. I'm going to base coat this lot all in black and then pick out all the other bits I need to in a bit, but just get more base coated first. I'm going to use that field grey for the gas mask tin. So I'm going to paint that over now. And also, I think that's a canteen, a water canteen. Could be wrong. I don't know what that is, actually, because I think the one's a water canteen. A little pouch underneath. Going to use Tundra Torp on that. Also use that for the gun strap as well. I mean, maybe the black, but I just want to vary it up a little bit. I'm not that fussed about 100% being historically correct. Just having fun with colour. That's what I'm doing. Then I'm going to pick out the wooden details on his Kar 98 using a little bit of leather brown like I did with the GI's Garand. And then I think this might be the actual water canteen, picking that out with brown. I don't really know what all the gym equipment is. I should do. Now, instead of like picking out different colours here with speed paints, I'm just going to do an all-over tone just to show the variation between the two. So this guy's just getting an all-over wash without any of the details being added with speed paints. And then just go around if it's starting to pool and soak up any excess. Wash watch, I call it. So I'll just go around, move it around if I need to. So there are, as you can see, by adding those extra few colours, it's made them look a little bit more realistic, or at least like they do in the history books and the movie screen, if you like. So what I'm going to do now is move on to adding some final details, some final embellishments, which are things like highlights, dry brushing, as well as some little speedy hacks. Now, I want these models to fit in with my winter stuff from this video up here. So if you want to see how I've done those, check that out. There was a nice little set that came out, which is previous to this one, which has got loads of like winter greatcoat troops and winter Fallschirmjäger. So I want to add this stuff to that. I know they're not really designed for winter clothing, but I guess from a resource point of view and a supply point of view, they would have been wearing these clothes. So what I'm going to do is tie these in now to that collection, but also add those extra highlights as well. A little bit of fun. So the first thing I'm going to do is an all-over dry brush over my model. So what I'm going to do is get some necrotic flesh, wipe as much of it off on the tissue paper as I can, and then I'm just going to gently flick over the model, and this is going to give me a highlight. I'm going to do this all over. Try and avoid the hands if I can and the flesh, but I can tidy those back up. But what it's going to do, it's going to highlight the green, the dark green, and that kind of khaki tone, as well as the webbing and stuff, using basically one colour to highlight all through. Then I'm just going to tidy up the skin, so whatever, because I've probably made some splodges here with a dry brush, which is totally fine. This is why I'm doing this now. Just rebase coat and tidy up. It always adds an extra bit of a highlight. Not going too mad picking out all the raised details and just like picking out sections here and there. Then any areas that look a little bit dark in places, I'm just going to tidy up with a little bit of armour green. Or if I'm not happy with some of the dry brushing, it looks a bit rough, or I've been a bit heavy-handed, you can just like slightly thin and go over that, and that'll just knock it back a little bit. But really, it's just tidying up some of those darker areas underneath. And then I'm just going to highlight the skin using some barbarian flesh. So this is going to be a little bit lighter than the paratrooper tan that we used. I'm just going to pick out the extremities here, so knuckles, cheekbones, nose, lips, that kind of thing. If you're feeling brave, you don't have to do that. I also realised the strap here needed picking out, so need to do that, as well as just tidy up the gaiters a little bit. Not much, just a bit. And sometimes you don't have to do this, but I like to get a little bit black, thin it down, and just in the recesses where one colour meets the other, if it's lost a little bit of its punch, you can just drop a little bit of black, really thin down black, or just use some more of that strong tone if you need to, especially if the eyes need a little bit more work. Just helps bridge the gap between the two textures. So I'm now going to move on to my secret weapon to make my models look a little bit more wintry. And I get some figure case sponge, put it into a little paint sleeve, twist it in until I'm happy with it. And then I'm going to get some Brigade Grace. This is an off-white. I'm just going to dab it down onto my palette. And then very much like dry brush, I'm just going to remove as much as I can, still leaving traces on that sponge. And then I'm just going to go around and just stab it around where the boots are, probably the calves up to the knees maybe, because snow kind of clings on a little bit, certainly when it starts to be like really cold and dry. I'm going to do it on the helmet, maybe where it's settled. Let's say it's mid-snowing or it's been a bit blizzardy before, settled on like the rucksack and stuff like that. Then just to tie that base in, so I know I did this brown originally, that was just a quick fix, but I want my guys to be wintry, so I'm going to get that Brigade Grey, and now I'm going to apply that all over the base. I'm going to do a couple of coats of that and make sure I pick the rim out as well. Again, when that's dry, I might do a second coat, depending on how streaky it is. In any areas that may look a little bit wishy-washy. And then I'm going to base it using some snow. So you can get snow effects from many places, Citadel, AK, whatever. You can use whatever you can find. So it's really nice, it's really goopy, and it just looks right. So I'm just going to move that around, apply it on in dollops here and there. Maybe bury it into the feet a little bit so it looks like it's sunken in a bit. You don't have to. You don't want them hovering on the snow. They're not Legolas. There we are. There's our American Ranger or infantryman in the snow. I've also picked out his hands as if he's wearing gloves. I'll come to that in a little bit with the German guide. But yeah, looks cool. So moving on to the German, again, very much like the American, I'm going to do an all-over dry brush here, but I'm using something called ash grey, which is a very light grey. I'm just going to go around, and that's going to pick out the field grey. It's going to pick out bits of the black, so very much like we did before. Then I'm going to get the paratrooper tan, and then just start tidying up or pick out the raised bits of the skin. So again, cheeks, nose, knuckles, whatever, just tidy back up. Again, you might have got a bit of that ash grey in some of those areas. So you want to tidy them up. Nice and straightforward. And just like the American, what I'm going to do here is just highlight the skin with barbarian flesh. Just pick out any extremities again, like knuckles, fingers, nose, cheeks, lips, if you can be bothered. Whatever sticks out, whatever's easy to paint. You don't have to go too mad. Just do what works to your skill level. Then just a little bit of tidying up here and there. So I'm going to tidy up that tundra top. I thinned down a little bit of black because just around some of the edges, it was a bit wishy-washy where I'd done that dry brush, gone a bit heavy. So any straps that may need tidying up, or boots if they're a bit scuffy looking. Also, don't forget the chin strap. Pick out the eyes. Again, I'm just thinning this down, dropped it in there. That strap around his helmet as well. Just little details. You could also use your finger as a little highlighting tool as well. I tend to do that. So yeah, work around, do some tidying up. Whatever colours you need to tidy up. Just add a bit more punch to them. And again, if you need to reapply some gunmetal in places, do that as well. And then very much like we did with the previous dude, I'm just going to get that sponge and start doing the snow effect. In some places I went a bit heavy-handed here. That's fine. All I need to do is just re-dab it a couple of times and it will come off. Or you can wipe with your finger or whatever. Or repaint it black if it's just not workable. And again, just dab around, stick on the helmet, shoulders, wherever. Whatever feels right. That's the beauty of this. There's no right or wrong way. There is obviously going overboard and doing too much. And then very much like the other one, we're just going to cover it in snow effect. Really adds that cold look to the models. It's really nice as well. It feels very Christmassy doing this. I felt incredibly festive when painting snow on these bases. Now, one thing I want to do to make my models look a little bit more wintry is to give them gloves. So I know I showed you how to paint flesh, but I'm now going to turn it into gloves. So I'm using that field grey colour I made, applying it in a couple of thin coats over the hands, and then I'm just going to highlight with that medieval forest just on the extremities. And then instantly it gives them that kind of winter feel because they've got gloves on and they've got snow around them. Makes them look wintry. Mega. There you are, simple. And there's our German, ready to head off out into the Ardennes forest and duke it out with some Americans, I guess. So as you can see, just by adding a highlight here and there and a sneaky little trick and tip, so like doing like a little bit of dry brushing all over and then doing that little sponging effect for the snow, has really, well, it's camouflaged some of the other bits which probably weren't as neat and tidy, which is the whole point sometimes of painting, is like focus on some areas, don't worry about the others. You can always hide those with a little clever technique, which is what I've done with that sponging effect. And also it's tied them in with my other collections, so that's great. But a little tip as well is just painting those hands to look like gloves. So I did that initially showing you how to paint the skin, but then just turn them into gloves. Kind of instantly gave them a bit of a winter feel anyway. By being on that snow base and then giving them gloves, instantly placed them into a winter setting. So really quick and simple without actually having any like winter clothing on or those extra bits that make them feel like they're wintry. But that's going to work great for my collections. So I'm well chuffed with that. So now what I'm going to do is jump on to painting that scenery. I'm going to do this quite quickly, quick and dirty. Now, I would have painted the entire set using sprays to start off with. I obviously, for this guide, I picked out 2 and I did them by hand for your convenience so you can see how that's done. But for myself, I would have sprayed everything green. I would have sprayed all the Germans grey. So those sprays would still exist, which they do. I've got them down there. So that's what I would use the sprays for here as well, is I'll use them for this scenery. Now I like, it's like a method I've been doing for a while for a lot of my historical sceneries. I spray them all green to start off with, and whilst it's still wet, I kind of dust them from an angle with some grey. That does 2 things. It base coats them. It also gives them a bit of a highlight, and that green underneath will look like, I guess, algae or moss, and just look a bit old and weathered. It gives it a bit of a weathering. So that then sets me up. All I need to do after that is do some dry brushing. So I'm going to now cover that. It's a really quick and simple way of getting the scenery done. You can always add to this as time goes by, but for the purpose of speed, I'm just going to show you how to quickly do that now. So the first step is to spray the buildings green. Dead simple, dead straightforward, work your way around. And then whilst that's still wet, get yourself some grey and then dust that from an angle. It just really helps because that green stays in the recesses and gives you that kind of mossy look. Obviously don't go too much. And then using most of the colours I've used already in this guide, I'm going to get some Tundra Taupe. I'm just going to dry brush that all over the edges of the stonework. Every little bit of stonework I can, including the paintwork and this, that and the other. So just work your way around, take your time, and then just do that dry brush. In some places you can go a little bit heavier than others, and that helps just to vary up the texture and finish of the building. Then I'm going to get Castle Grey. This is the only extra colour really I'm using here. So I'm getting Castle Grey because I needed a bone. And I'm just going to go around and dry brush the edges. Going to spend a little bit more time on the cobblestones that are sticking out, but a little bit on everything really, just to help punch it out a bit. And again, here I was a bit too heavy, but that's fine because if you just keep working into it, it'll fix it. And it just looks like weathered stone anyway. But you can go back over the previous colour if you're not happy with the effect. And just work your way around. Now you can use any brown or whatever here. I'm using the Speed Paint Hardened Leather because I was using it in the guide. And it looks like old sort of timber anyway, a little bit weathered, a little bit exposed to the elements if you like. So I'm just going to go around and then just coat all the wood details with that. Some places straight from the pot, other places a little bit more thinned down depending on how I want it to look. There's a few beams on this building to pick out, but you know, take your time. If you go too heavy and a bit like slapdash, then you're going to get splatters on your stonework, so do be mindful of that as well. That's something I learned a long time ago. Try not to splat too much. And then I'm going to use that Castle Grey just to dry brush the wood. Again, it just gives it a bit of a highlight. Even though it's the same colour as the stone, because I've got a different colour underneath, it helps vary it from the two textures so they don't look like they're made from the same material. If I used all the same colour, then it would have been very samey. And then just the little bits of rubble or debris, be a bit heavy on that. Now, if you want to add a little bit more embellishment to your building, you can make it look like it's a little bit scorched. So get some black and just build up some dry brushes. So the first one was quite soft, gave it kind of like a lighter grey kind of tone. But the more you build up, the darker it gets. And I tend to centralise that more to where the hole is, and it gets a little bit more grey around the outskirts. But definitely it's good to do that horizontal sort of dry brush as if that's where the smoke's been going up and it's just stained all the brickwork around it. And there we are. There is our building occupied by some rangers. Again, really straightforward, really simple. Those undercoats have done all the legwork really. It's just a matter of using a couple of dry brushes, a couple of colours you've already used in this guide, and then just, you know, picking out some of the details. But the models still stand out. They still look like Americans against a building. So there we are. As I said, just by using those two sprays, really quick, really dirty. It's super efficient way of painting scenery. And also you can use that same process for painting like things like bunkers and stuff. I mean, I've got a bunker done here using the exact same method. I went with a slightly lighter bone on that just so it looks a little bit, I guess, different. It's a concrete building, but a lot of my scenery, certainly my historical stuff, has a very similar tone and vibe, which means I can use them all together, usually on the same board. But that being said, if you want to add to it, you can. This is the great thing about painting scenery, is you can get it done to it's an okay point of view, and then you can always embellish and add to it as time goes on, like I've done with this piece of scenery here by sticking posters on, adding bird poo to the roof, I don't know, doing bullet holes. You can do what you want. So that's the great thing, is get some stuff on the tabletop, play some games with it, and then you can always embellish and add. And that's the same with the miniatures as well. So something worth pointing out about this starter set, and a lot of the stuff that Warlord do as well, is it's really good for reenacting some of your favourite scenes from movies, or like you want to recreate a battle that you've read about, or this, that and the other. But another thing I like is it gives me the opportunity to play around a bit. And well, there was a head on the sprue, and I thought, that reminds me of a certain character from a certain sort of franchise about superheroes during World War II. So I kind of went full Peach and decided to paint him like it. And you know what? I fell in love with him. I love him. He's great. So he's my new favourite. He's going to join my Rangers and my paratroopers in the Ardennes campaign. I can't see why he shouldn't. I might paint some other guys to go with him as well, some other howling commandos maybe. But something I want to do with my World War II stuff is probably go down that more fantastical route as well. So I can go down the Wolfenstein route, and maybe as time goes on do some Conflict 47, which is another game that Warlord do, which is cool because it's like pseudoscience, sort of like the world wars continued, and now they're on like walking tanks and weird and wonderful sciences, they're werewolf troops and stuff. So having Steve Rogers joining that is not too far-fetched, I don't think. But that head, what's Steve Rogers in my head? When he's got his little blue helmet on and he's got his little motorcycle goggles, I'm sure they did that on purpose. Speaking of which as well, if you don't know this, that set that you get of the Rangers, you also get the heads from the Saving Private Ryan cast, or inspired by the Saving Private Ryan cast. I will do them at some point as their own thing, but I just rolled the heads into random people here and there. I mean, I did Jackson the Sniper. It made sense, really. And that's something else, when you are building your forces, have a little look at the rules. In the starter guide, it does suggest building certain things at certain points. I just wanted to build stuff that I was going to use for my games. So if you are new to this, I would strongly recommend following the little playthrough guide that is in the starter set rules and build them as they suggest, because that would make sense for when it comes to playing. For me, I chose to go my own route because I know what I wanted, and I know it's just one of those things. Peachy likes to do his own thing and paint up stuff how he wants. That's how I've been doing it for years, because I'm mad. But thank you for watching this. I hope you found something useful and valuable from it, whether it's a little hack here and there, or it's just helped you get stuff on the tabletop. Also, don't forget to throw in the comments if you've got any suggestions on how you go about painting certain stuff from a speedy point of view. If you've got little hacks and trips you want to pass on to anyone that's watching this and may need a little bit of extra help or a little holding hand here and there. And also bear in mind, I did mine, guys, as winter troops. You can do them as whatever you want. It could be like the Sicily campaign. It could be like Europe. It doesn't have to be like winter like I've done. You could do what you want. Or it could be weird pseudoscience, Wolfenstein-esque kind of battles. It's entirely up to you. But when it comes to painting, I like to use the wise words of Captain America, which is compromise where you can, where you can't, don't. Simple as that. Words to live by when you're painting. Speaking of painting, just to give you a bit of a roundup, I guess, of the stuff that I've done for this video. The Americans themselves, the entirety of the box set from the starter set took me like 2 to 3 hours to paint up. And that's obviously getting them all based as well. Although I didn't get around to finish the Germans at the point of this video, it would be about the same amount of time for those because it's a duplicate amount of troops. Very similar kind of like methods. So probably 2 to 3 hours for those. And the senior literally took me half an hour. That's not including drying, but it was pretty straightforward. The sprays did a lot of the legwork for that. So in total, you're probably looking at 6 to 8 hours to get this starter set painted. Obviously, I've got experience. I've been doing it a lot longer. I can move my arm a bit faster. So, you know, it might take a little bit longer, but it gives you a bit of a ballpark of roughly using this guide from nothing to tabletop. It's pretty quick. Obviously, I'm not including building, which is a couple of hours worth of work as well. But it's a weekend. It's a weekend's worth of hobby. Also, I'd like to thank Warlord Games for sponsoring the video. I mean, I like painting World War II dolly men, so being sponsored by the people that make them to paint World War II dolly men and also go a bit far-fetched and do Steve Rogers from Captain America, yeah, it's fine. I'm sure they won't mind. He looks cool. I mean, don't make the model's head. That's all I'm saying. Don't stick his head on the sprue if you don't want him making. I know you didn't put a shield on. I added that myself. I know that. I know. Don't judge me. Also, big thanks to these people. They're beautiful human beings as well. These are my patrons. If you want to consider joining the Patreon, please do. Beautiful community, many different tiers, from joining the Discord all the way up to getting some one-to-one tuition from myself. But I'm going to go off now and try and beat Captain America's record of punching Adolf Hitler in the face. I think he did it 200 times. I'm going to try and do it 201. Obviously in model format, not in reality, not possible. Wish it was, but it isn't. Bye.